Daniel, that was beautiful. And thank you so much. And thank you, Sean. What a team. The kingdom of heaven is not conditional. Jesus said, people are going to tell you that it's here or it's there, but it's none of those places. Where's the kingdom of heaven? Within you. And if it's within you, that means it's portable, because you're carrying it around with you. So it doesn't need to have you do the thing I want you to do. You know what that thing is, don't you? It doesn't mean that the conditions have to be the way I want them. The weather doesn't have to cooperate. I don't need to have a certain bank balance, a certain relationship status, a certain physical state of consciousness or body. So what is heaven then? Well, it's something beyond. Remember, in our meditation, we opened a door and we walked through it and we closed the door. We moved into heaven. Now, it's not a place even in our imaginations, but this was an imaginary journey that maybe got us to do a little bit of spiritual work because it happens on another level. But ask yourself, where is heaven for me? What do I think of when I think of heaven, and how do I get there? Do I think that I have to get conditions a certain way in order to be there? Am I still stuck in my training from my childhood that heaven's a place in the sky? It's understandable because the word heaven literally in both Hebrew and Greek means sky. So when people said, well, heaven's up in the sky, kind of made sense. But we've moved beyond that. Even traditional religious people understand that. So what is heaven really? And what is the door that needs to open? You know, life is a series of doors that move us into a heavenly consciousness. And the trick to it, our part in it, is to do three things. One is to realize when it's time to open the door. Second is to walk through the door. And the third is to close the door behind us. To move forward into that heavenly consciousness, even from that which was familiar and seemed wonderful in the past. So let me ask you this question. Let's just imagine that you're on this side of the door. How does that feel? Feels kind of familiar. I don't know what the heck's on the other side of that door. You know, I think I might just stay on this side. And that's how many of us live our lives. Bernie Siegel, who wrote Love, Medicine, and Miracles. How many people have read that book? Bernie Siegel is wonderful, so many of you. Bernie Siegel, his very first group was the Exceptional Cancer Patients Group. And he found that the people who were the core people in that group got better. And many of them had what were called spontaneous remissions or miraculous healings. But he also said that far more people dropped out. And some of them were dropping out when they were getting better. He spoke at my church and he talked about this. And one thing that he said was that things got to a certain point with a group. This is in the 1970s when, that stuff was considered not mainstream at all. And he was accosted by his colleagues in his hospital and his colleagues in the area, and people were criticizing him and saying, this is quackery, it's unscientific, you must not do this, you must shut it down. And he listened to them. Now, when you are ready to walk through a door in your life, have you ever had anybody tell you, that's not a good idea? Why are you doing that? Other people don't do that. Nobody in our family does that. You're weird. You're strange. I don't understand you. Can you explain it again for the 1000th time? And how do you respond to that? Certainly you have compassion upon those individuals, but at some point you have to decide whether or not you're going to walk through the door. So in this case, Bernie Siegel decided to shut down his group. And he told them, his core group of people, I'm going to have to shut down this group. This was not a good idea, and we're not going to have it anymore. And they got up in his face and rebelled and said, we are not going to shut down our group. We are going to continue our group because we're getting better, but we don't want you to teach us anymore. We're going to teach you. And so he took a back seat and they became his teachers because they were demonstrating these wonderful and lofty theoretical ideas of consciousness and healing that he believed in. He'd seen some evidence for, but he really wasn't willing to walk through that door with them. So they dragged him through it. It's not just about healing, though. It's not about getting any outer effect. The truth is that whether or not we have a healed body is not the important thing for our soul. Because when all is said and done, what do we take with us? Not our bodies. What about better relationships and getting along with people? We don't take those with us either. How about our bank balance and our prosperity? We don't take that with us either. How about anything in the outer world? No. We take one thing with us, and the whole purpose of all the spiritual work we do, and as the title of the talk says, spirituality is an inside job. The one thing we take with us is what? Our consciousness, our awareness, the who that we are. And so let's say you, like many of those people that Bernie Siegel worked with, have a healing that's physical and you're on the planet for a few years longer. That's not the crucial thing. You've engaged with your spiritual resources and brought to bear certain things, built faith, perhaps have been a light for other people, but also you have built something into your soul consciousness and your soul awareness. Myrtle Fillmore talked about this in the last year of her life. Myrtle Fillmore said, and I'm paraphrasing here because I can't remember quotes very well, but she said, my heart thrilled and still continues to thrill at the knowledge that so many people have received physical healings. I've seen people who have overcome great things. And I love that, and I still do. But what I've come to learn as the years have gone on, that's not what's important. What was important was the soul growth in each of those people, whether or not it showed up in a physical way. The soul growth. And sometimes it shows up in different ways, and we've got to do our work in a detached way. I'm going to say something challenging. I'm going to say this: to the extent that you are detached from the outcome, your prayer work is more effective. To the extent that you are not demanding a certain outcome, but you are visualizing it, your prayer work is more effective. There's an old study in biofeedback that just is popping into my mind that shares this principle in a physical way. They found that if they could train people, they were doing work with people with migraines, and they found that when people had migraine headaches, their fingertips, their extremities were colder for some reason, and so they thought to themselves, well, maybe what we should do is train people to get their fingers to warm up. And because they found that when people got over their migraine, their fingers warmed up. So they thought, well, maybe we'll just reverse it and teach them to warm their fingers, and then they'll get over their migraines. Well, as they tried to train people holding little bulb thermometers to warm up their fingertips and told them to will, they found that the temperature got colder as they tried to force it to become hotter. Why? Because they're forcing their will. It doesn't work. You've seen this with everything from bowling to golf to anything, to ballroom dancing. If you can't force your way, you have to do something else. So instead, they decided to tell them, just imagine warmth. Maybe visualize warm light or something without willing it. And yes, they found in many cases they were able to get people to get over their migraines and their fingertips got warm. I share all this with you, not so you get over your migraine and your fingertips get warm, but to show that it's letting go of your attachment to outcomes that brings about the better outcomes. And hopefully that doesn't explode your mind, but maybe it'll help. There's a wonderful man in a church that I served. He wrote an entire book about his experience. His name was Mike McCord, and he's now the head of the green teams for all of Unity. But when I met Mike McCord, I had been in the church there in Kansas for 6 months, and I was in my car. I was a passenger, and I got a message saying that I had a voicemail message. So I listened to it, and somebody left the message that this man, and I didn't recognize his name, Mike McCord, was in the hospital with a partial paralysis and a partially fractured vertebrae in his neck. And I was just coming up on the off-ramp to to get to that hospital, even though I was going out of town. So we pulled in, and I went upstairs, and I found out later, and he said I could share this, that the reason why I didn't know him is because I showed up and he disappeared. So I didn't really know the man. So I'm sitting here with him and praying with him, and he shares with me how angry he was because the night before, the partial analysis paralysis became full paralysis. He sneezed, and it did the rest of it so that he was paraplegic. He couldn't feel a thing in his extremities from here down, and he was very angry. He felt it was very unfair. And we did some work, we did some spiritual work, and he decided right there and right then that he was going to do his spiritual work. He was not going to let this victimize him, that he was going to engage with this possibility. I'm going to back up for a second. When the door opens in your life, sometimes the door opens and it's labeled, I desire something more. I want something spiritual. I want love. I want peace, the kingdom of heaven. I want the pearl of great price, the treasure in the field. But sometimes it's labeled something that's unjust, unfair, and inconvenient. And in his case, it was that. And we must engage, whether it looks positive or negative, and open that door. And in his case, he decided to do this. He'd been attending Jane Hart's classes in that church, and he took out the recordings and he listened to them all the time when he wasn't doing physical therapy. He got to the point where he could wiggle one toe, then both toes. He began to work with it more and more and more. It got to the point where, and they called him the Energizer Bunny, because when he wasn't doing physical therapy, he was doing consciousness therapy and didn't let up until from morning till night. So I was in the meditation group in that church on Tuesday nights, like we have on Wednesday nights here. Jane was leading it, and he had gotten to the point where he was in a walker, and he would show up in his walker, but he wasn't there that night, which was kind of unusual because he was every week he was there. So Jane was giving a lecture beforehand. She said, and when you are willing to take the spiritual step, the door will thrust open. And at that moment, the door thrust open, and he walked in with no walker. And he was on the outside. He didn't time it. Nothing was arranged in advance. This was one of those synchronistic things. Our hair stood on end, and he continued that. And right after that, he sent me an email saying, I walked a mile. I think I can do 2 next week. And he did. And I went to a symposium once where he was speaking, and he's spoken all over now because of his total healing. But he was talking to this group of doctors and health professionals about his healing, because they said that there wasn't a single case of anybody who had his level of injury that they'd ever heard of anywhere in the country where they were able to walk at all, even with a walker. But he would say, well, to his physical therapist, she said, that he was going to be in a marathon, that he was going to climb Mount Elbert, the highest mountain in Colorado. And she said, I wanted to just stop my ears up because I just didn't want to hear it. It was just so ridiculous. And I didn't want him to be disappointed. But he did both. But he did notice something that was very interesting. He would go, as he began to get mobility, and he would go to these different hospitals and go into the treatment centers, and he would tell them about what he had done. And he got banned from some of them because the doctors said, we don't want people to get false hope. You know, that reminds me of Bernie Siegel, and one woman in his group, his cancer support group, said that her doctor had sent her home saying she was going to die, and he said, all you have is a hope and a prayer. And she said, he didn't realize it, but he prescribed the 2 things that healed me, and he has no idea, hope and prayer. But Mike McCord continued to do his work, and the day before he was supposed to climb Mount Elbert in Colorado, he was in a whitewater rafting accident and broke 3 ribs, and he climbed anyway. And it wasn't a straight line, this healing. The thing is that he engaged the inner process of doing the visualization and the healing work and the prayer work every single day, no matter how he felt, no matter what the conditions were, no matter what was going on. He did his work. That's why they called him the Energizer Bunny. And during that period of time, he went through a divorce that was very, very difficult. He lost his job at the bank for his absenteeism, and he visualized, and we held with him in prayer to have his dream job. and his dream job was to help low-income people, and he got this job with the federal government where he was able to help low-income people get their housing. He got his dream relationship. His whole life opened up. Today, he's an iconic figure in the Unity movement leading the Green Teams. I'm sharing this with you because he says something very interesting. He says, not everybody's going to have the results I had. Not everybody's going to have any specific results at all. But you can always make things better, and you can always have spiritual growth. It's about spirituality, which is really the growth of your soul consciousness, about your willingness to recognize there's a door that's opening, I'm walking through it, and I'm letting the door close behind me. And this is not just about physical healing. It's about any spiritual change in your life. And I want to ask you right now, in your life, what is your understanding of your next spiritual step? What is that door that's opening leading you into? You may not have a clear idea of it. Sometimes we're in mystery about it, but you might. You might have a tangible idea about it, but realize that even that isn't it because it's your spiritual growth. And then ask yourself, am I willing to engage every day unconditionally with my spiritual practices? Spirituality is an inside job. I experienced this in a very interesting way in my very first church. I was on television in a Unity program, and sometimes people would come for counseling who didn't ever attend the church. And there was this guy who'd come every 6 weeks or so, and he'd show up drunk. And he wanted me to give him an affirmation so that he could drink and not be an alcoholic. And I was very naive. This is 38 years ago. I didn't know any better, so I would argue back, and he would talk circles around me. And so finally, after he did this several times, about every 6 weeks, I called an alcoholic friend of mine who was in successful recovery, and I told him the story, and he said, Greg, you never argue with a drunk. You're always going to lose. They have more practice than you. So you're not going to have good arguments. But he said, I would encourage you to say to him that you're willing to engage him and talk to him and counsel him as long as he shows up sober. Ooh, he didn't like that the next time. And I didn't see him for 2 years, but he finally showed up, again unannounced, but he was sober. And he said to me, this is part of my recovery. I want to tell you that that was my turning point. When you wouldn't argue with me, I realized I went home and I recognized that I was arguing with myself. And that I got myself into a meeting, and I've been sober ever since. Because he was willing to engage with the spiritual growth. Now, sometimes we have to do something that is a little bit dramatic, that backs up our spiritual step. Sometimes we'll decide, I'm going to go to, if you're in recovery, 30 meetings in 30 days. Or sometimes I went through a period a few years ago, which really led to a lot of great changes in my life that were not what I wanted, but they were very, very helpful. I went through a 5-day fast. I'm not saying you should go fasting, but that's what I did. Another time I went on a 9-day retreat with Trappist monks. Half of it was silent. It was a really powerful experience that had opened me up to all kinds of changes in my life. Sometimes it's just taking a walk around the block. Sometimes it's just making a commitment to yourself that you're going to spend some time in nature every day. What is it for you? What represents for you that willingness to back up that intention that you have? The question right now is, what is your commitment? What is your commitment to your spiritual growth? Do you have a commitment to your spiritual growth? And then how do you identify it? Because that commitment is that which is going to open the door for you. And then you have to be willing to walk through that door and then close it behind you, which means that you're willing to let go of that old consciousness that perhaps served you up to a certain point. When we're on this side of the door, we look at the other side of the door, and sometimes it looks scary to us. Sometimes we don't want to get anywhere near it. Even though we may not like our life the way it is, we're very comfortable, and at least it's familiar. But life is either a grand adventure or it's nothing. People who are just living their life according to what's safe, what's comfortable, are living their lives only halfway. You're a soul in evolution. You brought yourself into this lifetime in order to experience your soul potential. And you will never experience that soul potential until you're willing to walk through that door. Open it, walk through it, and close it behind you. And sometimes, as I was sharing a moment ago, that door that opens is labeled the treasure in the field, the pearl of great price, the kingdom of heaven, the wonderful experience that I'm yearning for. And that's a wonderful thing, that desire in our heart for that more. But sometimes it's labeled something that's unfair, unjust, and inconvenient. And we don't think it's right. There was a woman in this church, and she wrote a chapter in the book by Stretton Smith, Out of the Blue. He created the 4T Prosperity Program. How many people read Out of the Blue, that book? And she had been a member of this church. This is 25 years ago when I was here before. And she shared the story, and she would come to the Tuesday morning meditation and sit in the silence at 10 a.m. But the work that she was doing was because when she was a child, her parents in another country opted to have one of her ovaries removed. It was an elective thing, and I didn't really understand, but she didn't feel it was right, and she wanted to have kids, and she was having a hard time having kids, and she really resented her parents, and she realized she had to forgive her parents. So she worked in every Tuesday and forgiving her parents, and also forgiving all those women who were having kids around her that she felt jealous of. And she shared this. This was part of her experience. Now, she'd met her husband in the 4T Prosperity Program, but they were hoping to get pregnant, but she had an ovarian cyst on her remaining ovary that they couldn't operate on if she was ever going to have a child, and she opted not to have any surgery because that would have kept her from having a child. So she did her spiritual work visualizing every day, and it shrunk all the way down to nothing. And the last week of the prosperity program that she took, the 4T, she wasn't there because she had morning sickness. And her baby was born a few weeks later. And but what she shared with everyone was the whole thing was a divine setup to help her to do her forgiveness work, to engage with her spiritual process, to engage with these principles. You know, we get together in a community, a spiritual community like this, to support ourselves and one another in taking spiritual steps. I support myself in taking a spiritual step. Together? I support myself in taking a spiritual step. So, once again, think about the door that is opening for you. Think about the kingdom of heaven that seems to be on the other side of that door. Ask yourself, what is my next spiritual step? Where am I moving in my consciousness? And if you don't have a clear idea, just know it's something in mystery that is unfamiliar to you, that may be something that may feel a little bit uncomfortable to you. But it's okay because you are made of the stuff of God. You are made of star stuff. And you are empowered in this now moment to move through this door and to move into this wonderful kingdom of heaven consciousness. So ask yourself, what is it that I can do to open that door, to show my own consciousness and the whole universe of good, God the good omnipotent, that I mean business. And so I'm willing to make a spiritual commitment to a certain amount of spiritual growth every day, no matter how I feel, no matter how it looks to me. You know, meditation is something that this woman had practiced, that I was talking about. And a lot of people say, what good's that going to do me? It's a lot of nothing. It's a lot of silence, right? But the truth is that it is by shutting down and then opening up that we open up to the whole universe. You know, when my computer stops working, what is it you do? You reboot. And 80% of the time, that's all it takes. It's going to start working. When are we willing to every day take some time to quiet ourselves and to get some divine inspiration and to open ourselves? And there are many spiritual practices that can help us. I want to ask you, this is our closing affirmation, but it's part of this practice and this discipline, to open up your Get in the Flow Unexpected Income brochure. And we're going to do this affirmation series here. It's been used for many, many years by thousands of people, and we're plugging into that consciousness right now and making it a part of ourselves. So I'm going to ask you to join with me with the words, my life. Together? My life is blessed with infinite abundance. The abundance of God is my infinite resource. I am now in the flow of abundant blessings. Good is now flowing into my life through unexpected avenues. God is actively at work in my life, blessing me. I open my mind to receive my good. I expand my capacity to give and receive my good. Wonderful, positive, surprising things are now happening for me. With God as my source, I am amazed at my rich abundance. I give freely and fearlessly into life, and life multiplies and returns my gift many times over. Many rich blessings now manifest in expected and unexpected ways. I am grateful, and so it is. Amen.